Hey guys, today we begin with a story that doesn't start with war or kings or thunder in the sky, but with seafoam, silence, and the first breath of beauty entering the world. It's a story that unfolds slowly, like the tide rolling across untouched sand. A story without urgency, without fear, only presence. Tonight, we'll drift gently through the birth of Aphrodite, the goddess of love and grace, as she rises from the sea and walks the quiet island that remembers her. You'll follow her through moss-covered groves, into moonlit pools, past fig trees and stones warmed by sunlight. There is no rush here, only soft air, distant waves, and the slow blooming of something eternal. As the gods begin to stir and the stars watch in silence, her name Aphrodite moves through the world like breath. Before you settle in and get comfortable, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I'm doing here. In the comments, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. It's always fascinating to see our sleepy little myth-loving community stretch across the world. And if there's a particular myth, legend, or story you'd love to hear next, share it below. I'm always listening. Now, dim the lights, let your thoughts slow down, and let's drift gently into tonight's story. In the time before time, the earth and sky had already been shaped by the old powers. Titans ruled. The stars looked down with quiet curiosity, and the sea stretched endlessly, gently breathing in and out, its waves like the slow heartbeat of a sleeping world. It was neither cold nor warm, just quiet, just constant, just there. On this day, or perhaps it was night, or something in between, the sky glowed pale, veiled by soft mist. There were no ships on the ocean then, no sails, no laughter, no footprints on the sand. The world was resting. The waves rolled in gentle rhythm, and the wind moved low across the surface, carrying nothing but the salt and silence. And then, from the deep, something began. It began not with a roar, but with a shimmer, a gathering of foam near the rocks. Small at first, like the delicate breath of sea creatures, but it grew. The foam was white, but not plain. It glowed faintly with silver and pearl, like moonlight pressed into bubbles. It spun slowly in place, touched by currents that did not seem to come from this world. This foam was not ordinary. It had purpose. It had memory. It had something sacred in it. And from it, something began to take shape. The sea knew. The sky paused. Even the wind, that soft companion to all stories, grew still. The foam stirred, and there she was. Not suddenly, not sharply, but slowly, like a memory, like a dream that has waited patiently to be remembered. She rose from the water, her form still wrapped in light and mist, hair like spun gold or strands of dawn, skin touched by the softness of clouds, eyes that had not yet opened, but already knew the shape of love. The sea cradled her gently, as if it had always been waiting. The foam slid down her arms, curled around her legs, and dissolved back into the tide, its task completed. She floated there, upright, her feet not touching any ground, her body shimmering with drops of salt water that caught the faint light of the sky. Aphrodite, not yet named, not yet known, but she was there, breathing, being, becoming. She did not speak. She did not need to. The world listened anyway. Around her, the sea shifted color, a blush of pink, a shimmer of gold. Shells stirred beneath the surface. Fishes paused. Even the smallest creatures in the tide pools leaned quietly toward her. And above, The air grew warmer. Not hot, just softer. The kind of warmth that touches your skin when you lie still beneath the sun, eyes closed, half asleep. The kind of warmth that doesn't demand attention. It just holds you gently. She began to drift. Not like a ship, not like a leaf, but like something sacred carried by purpose. The currents moved not to guide her, but to honor her. Waves bowed beneath her. The sky mirrored her movement. The world made room, and on the distant shore, still untouched, still waiting, flowers began to bloom, not because of the season, not because of the sun, but because something beautiful had entered the world, and the earth remembered how to respond. She floated, carried slowly by the rhythm of the tide, toward that waiting land. And while she moved, the world remembered what softness was. The waters around her shimmered with tiny lights, not stars, but the glimmer of sea spirits, perhaps, or memories of stars, fallen into the sea. They danced around her silently, like tiny wishes never spoken aloud. She did not smile, not yet, but her face was peaceful, as if she knew where she came from, as if she knew where she was going. And still, she said nothing. Sometimes, silence is not emptiness. Sometimes it is fullness too large to speak. She passed small islands, quiet, green, untouched. Birds in the trees looked toward her, not afraid, not surprised, just recognizing, as if even they had waited for this. And the sea, ever steady, kept carrying her. Not quickly, not slowly, just perfectly. A journey without haste, a movement without effort. It is said that beauty can be sharp, that it can blind or burn, but not her. She was soft, she was quiet, she was beauty that soothed, that healed, that waited with you, even if you had no words to give. And as she drifted, the world softened around her. The sky grew bluer, the clouds thinned, the air smelled of salt and something sweet like fruit that had never been named, and the sea kept singing its soft song, just beneath hearing, just beneath waking. Somewhere, far away, the gods began to stir, not with fear, not with excitement, but with a stillness that meant reverence. They could feel it. Something beautiful had been born, not from war, not from thunder, but from sea and silence. And she kept drifting. The shore grew closer, not yet here, not yet ready, but close. She opened her eyes. They were not cold, they were not bright, they were deep. The kind of eyes that remember old things, the kind of eyes that see love before it's spoken, the kind of eyes that ask nothing but presence. She looked at the sky. She looked at the waves. She looked at the shore. And she waited, not for someone, not for permission, just waited, as if the world still had one more breath to take before it could meet her. And the sea, patient as always, took that breath with her. The sea continued its slow breath as Aphrodite floated closer to the island, an island that had not yet been named, not yet drawn on any maps, not yet claimed by the gods or the mortals. And yet, it had always existed, as if it had been quietly preparing for this moment since the beginning of the world. It was not large, and it was not small. It rose gently from the waves like the back of a sleeping creature, covered in soft mosses and warm stones, wrapped in winds that smelled faintly of thyme and perhaps myrtle, Though no one had planted anything there, the trees that grew on its highest ridge were twisted by time and salt, their bark rough and dark, but their leaves shimmered like green silk under the morning light, and their roots curled deep into the bones of the island, as if holding ancient secrets in their grip. Birds nested there, small ones with soft feathers and gentle songs that didn't carry far, as if even their voices were subdued by the stillness of the sea. As Aphrodite drew closer, the waters around the island began to calm, not because they were ever wild, but because something in them recognized her, and they wanted to welcome her with the gentlest possible embrace. The waves that lapped at the shore moved in rhythm with her breath, and where they touched the sand, they left behind trails of foam so delicate they dissolved before the wind could carry them away. The beach itself was made not of coarse sand or jagged shells, but of crushed marble and pale coral, a soft white surface that looked like powdered moonlight, smooth beneath the foot, cool in the morning air, warm by midday, always clean, always waiting. It curved like a crescent, open to the sea, as if the land itself had opened its arms to receive her. Her body, still glowing faintly from the touch of seafoam, began to tilt forward as the current slowed, her feet touching the surface of the water, not walking, not stepping, but allowing herself to be guided, gently, until her toes felt the firm coolness of the sand just beneath the shallows. She did not look down. She did not hesitate. Her eyes remained forward, as if the horizon itself held something she alone could see. Her breath was steady, and though her chest moved with each inhale, it did so quietly, like the wind moving through reeds in a distant field. Each breath was a moment. Each moment was a blessing. The moment her foot pressed fully into the sand, the island seemed to exhale. The trees above trembled softly, their leaves catching the light in patterns that danced across the canopy like fingers of sun through lace. Somewhere in the distance, the slow creak of a tree limb echoed down the slope, followed by the faint rustle of a wild goat moving through underbrush that had never been trimmed. This was not the sound of alarm. It was the sound of welcome, of acknowledgement. Something new had touched the world, and everything around it had paused to feel it. She walked, not quickly, not slowly, but with a step that suggested she had walked through time itself and never rushed. Each movement was fluid, not choreographed, but natural, the way waves roll or petals fall. The foam still clung to parts of her, in thin threads that shimmered like silk, catching the sun just enough to create halos around her shoulders and thighs. Her hair, long and heavy with seawater, trailed behind her in damp curls that brushed against the tops of her calves with each step. The wind, kind and quiet, lifted some strands gently away from her face but never pulled, as if even the breeze understood that her path was her own and not to be hurried or obscured. She moved up the slope of the beach, where the marble sand gave way to patches of grass. Not the harsh grass of mountain meadows or dry plains, but the soft, springy kind that grows where no feet have ever trampled it. Blades thin and pale green, with a faint golden tint, like they had been painted by morning itself. Scattered among the grass were tiny flowers, low to the earth, opening even as she approached, as if her presence was sunlight made physical. Some were white, like the inside of a shell, others pink, like the blush of a young fig before it ripens. They gave no scent at first, but as she passed, a fragrance began to rise, faint, sweet, and unfamiliar. Not floral exactly, but something round and warm, something that made the air feel softer in the lungs. She paused at a flat stone, half buried in the grass, worn smooth by wind and time. She sat, not carefully, but comfortably, as if this place had always belonged to her, or she to it. The stone took her weight without resistance, its surface cool beneath her skin. She folded her legs slowly, leaned forward slightly, and placed her hands on her knees, fingers open, palms relaxed, as though listening not with her ears, but with her skin. Around her, the air thickened, not with heat or pressure, but with presence. Even the insects quieted. The birds paused. The whole island seemed to hold its breath, not out of fear or anticipation, but out of reverence. She looked ahead, toward the sea, not to call it back, not to leave, but to honor it, the way a child looks back at a parent after the first step. The sea responded with a wave, small and round, that rolled gently across the shore and disappeared into foam once more. And then silence. But not the silence of emptiness, the silence of completion. She closed her eyes. Her eyelashes were thick and wet with salt. Her lids moved slowly, not heavily, but with the weight of meaning. Her breathing slowed, her shoulders dropped, and for a time, maybe a moment, maybe hours, she sat still, unmoving, untouched by anything but the air itself. And while she rested, the world began to shift. Not violently, not loudly, but beneath the soil, the roots of trees adjusted. Beneath the sea, the fish began to swim in new patterns. In the clouds above, light bent in ways it never had before, casting soft gold across the slopes of distant hills that had never before glowed. Something sacred had taken root, not in thunder or storm, but in stillness, in rest. There would be temples one day, songs, statues carved from ivory and stone, but not yet, for now there was only her, and the island, and the quiet rhythm of the sea retreating behind her. The morning on the island did not arrive with fanfare, nor with sudden light, but with the gradual unfolding of warmth across its stones and leaves, as if the sun were painting the world slowly, using only the softest brushes dipped in liquid gold. Shadows stretched gently, as if awakening from a long sleep, and the mist that had lingered along the slopes began to rise, not in a rush, but in swirling columns, like incense drifting in a temple without walls. The island seemed to breathe. It had no voice, no language, but it whispered in movement, in the rustle of leaves, in the murmur of hidden springs that gurgled beneath moss-covered rocks, in the shifting of grasses kissed by dew and stirred by a breeze that did not come from any specific direction, but rather from everywhere at once. The kind of breeze that feels like a thought not quite formed, but gently persistent. Aphrodite had not moved much since she first sat on the stone. Her body remained poised yet relaxed, her hands still resting lightly on her knees, her hair now beginning to dry in soft waves that framed her shoulders and flowed down her back like threads of molten honey kissed by salt. The salt remained, forming a faint glimmer on her skin, a delicate crust that caught the morning light and turned her into something both earthly and divine. She blinked slowly, not as a reflex, but as if each motion were a gesture of communion with the world around her. Her lips were closed, but her breath was steady and audible, the quiet in and out rhythm of a being not hurried by time, not pressed by desire, but wholly immersed in the present. A breath not for survival, but for sensing, for tasting the wind, for feeling the humidity, for measuring the weight of silence. She looked at the grass before her, and though it was nothing unusual, thin blades bending under the lightest of pressure, Dotted with occasional blue flowers that opened only halfway, she regarded it as if it were the first green she had ever seen. Her gaze was not analytical, not curious, but reverent, as if she understood that the grass too was part of this moment, that it too had waited. She extended one hand, slowly, fingers uncurling with the delicacy of a flower unfurling under moonlight, and let her palm hover just above the surface. She did not touch it. Not yet. The space between her skin and the grass was a sacred distance where intention lived, a breath of space where two worlds nearly met but held their form. It was enough. The grass shivered. Behind her, a path was beginning to form. Not carved, not marked, but gently pressed into the land by the natural arrangement of plants and stones. Ferns leaned to one side. Pebbles lined up in a soft arc. Trees moved their limbs to create a gap where there had been none. No one had touched them. No hand had shaped it. And yet, the path was there, growing, emerging, revealing itself not as something newly made, but as something long hidden, waiting only for the right moment, the right presence to come into view. Aphrodite turned her head slowly and looked upon it, her expression calm and unreadable, as though she were seeing a memory instead of a place. She rose, unhurried, her body extended with the grace of someone who had never known stiffness, never known burden. The stone, now warmed by her rest, held her shape faintly, a memory in heat. She stepped onto the path, not with ownership, not with expectation, but with recognition, as if the land had spoken her name, and she had simply answered. Her feet were bare, but the ground did not resist her. The moss cushioned her. The pebbles arranged themselves beneath her soles like beads on a necklace, not cutting, not cold, but firm and grounding, anchoring her to a world she had only just entered, yet seemed always to belong to. The path led upward, gently, weaving through olive trees with bark that peeled in curled strips the color of parchment, their trunks twisted like the spines of dancers mid-motion, their leaves silver on one side and dull green on the other, so that when the wind moved through them, the canopy shimmered as though catching starlight in broad daylight. Their fruit was not yet ripe, still small and hard, but they gave off the faint aroma of sap and oil, of crushed leaves and sunlight. Somewhere in the distance, the soft bleating of goats drifted down from the higher slopes, lazy and content, their sound neither sudden nor loud, but part of the landscape, like a brushstroke in a wide painting. As she walked, Aphrodite passed beneath arching branches, hung with myrtle, their tiny white flowers gathered in clusters that swayed as if nodding in greeting. The scent of myrtle, sweet, slightly peppery, reminiscent of spice, but softened by green wrapped around her like a garment. In later years, the Greeks would offer myrtle in weddings and ceremonies of love, would burn it in temples and weave it into crowns, never fully knowing why, only that it felt right. They would not remember that the plant had first bent toward a woman who walked alone, whose name had not yet been spoken aloud, whose footsteps had not yet been recorded in song. At the top of the slope, the trees opened into a clearing, a wide and sunlit space, with flat stones underfoot and tall grasses along the perimeter, their tips heavy with seed, swaying with such slowness, it was unclear whether it was the wind or some internal rhythm that moved them. In the center of the clearing was a spring. It did not bubble or rush. It emerged from the base of a low stone in a thin, constant trickle, falling into a shallow pool lined with worn rocks and soft green moss that floated on the surface like sleeping islands. The water was impossibly clear, with a faint blue tint like sky caught in liquid form. Tiny fish darted through it, silver, barely the length of a fingertip, fast but not afraid. Aphrodite knelt at the edge of the spring, folding her legs beneath her, the way a child might kneel before a candle, not in prayer, but in quiet fascination. She cupped her hands slowly, drawing the water into her palms and lifting it to her face. She did not drink. She held it there, letting it run through her fingers, feeling its temperature, its weight, its clarity. When she finally brought her hands to her lips, it was not with thirst, but with ceremony, as if to taste the land itself, to become part of it. The water touched her mouth, cool and mineral, not sweet but pure, and in that moment, the world seemed to pause again. And around her, everything softened. The grass grew greener, the stones warmed further. The spring glowed faintly in the shadow of the trees. Something had been accepted. Something had been answered. And though she did not speak, the land heard her. And though the land had no voice, she understood. The clearing where the spring rested was not merely a place between trees, not merely a hollow in the forest or a pause in the green. It was a space that held memory in its stones, memory in the air, as if it had known it would be needed one day by something sacred, and had waited without impatience. The sunlight here did not press downward like it did in open meadows or harsh ridges. Instead, it filtered through the branches above in long, gentle columns, golden in tone, quiet in rhythm, like slow rain made of light. Dust floated in it, not dust of neglect, but the fine powder of pollen and earth caught midair, glinting with the faint shimmer of the morning's breath. The grove was not wide, but it felt infinite, not because of distance, but because of stillness, because time moved differently there, not halted, but softened, stretched, folded inward like fabric beneath a sleeping hand. Aphrodite remained by the water, her presence blending with the space around her until it was difficult to say where the island ended and she began. Her fingers trailed through the pool, disturbing its perfect surface only slightly, leaving behind tiny ripples that moved toward the stone edges and disappeared before returning. The fish continued to swim, darting between her shadow and the brighter spots where sunlight touched the bottom, their scales flashing briefly like polished silver before vanishing again beneath a floating leaf or fragment of moss. She leaned forward and inhaled, not sharply, not consciously, but in the way one breathes when they are truly safe, when the world no longer demands, when it only offers. The air smelled of earth and green things, of wet stone and the faint trace of flowering branches carried on the breeze, of bark that had grown thick and protective, of roots that had waited generations beneath soil, coiling like sleeping serpents in the darkness, patient, unmoving, sacred. Behind her, the grove was ringed with trees older than the paths of men, trees that had grown not upward, but outward. Their branches twisted and wide, creating a canopy that folded over itself like woven fabric. The bark was pale in some places, dark in others, textured like woven rope, warm to the touch, marked with lines that seemed random until studied for in those lines. If you looked long enough, you could see stories, not written, but grown. Rings of time, cracks of storms survived, scars of branches broken and regrown. Birds lived there, not in cages of straw, but in deep hollows and cradles of bark where light never reached, their feathers muted, their calls soft, not shrill songs of alarm or dominance, but coos, clicks, short ascending phrases that echoed, and then faded like a sigh returned by the wind. Aphrodite rose from the water's edge, with the same quiet as when she had first arrived, her knees unfolding, her weight shifting as if the earth beneath her anticipated every step. Her skin was damp where she had washed her arms and face, and the droplets that clung to her moved slowly down her limbs, collecting salt and light and rolling off into the moss below. Her hair had dried more in the warmth of the grove, curling slightly now, heavier at the ends where the sea had lingered, lighter at the crown where it caught the drifting sunbeams. Her body, still untouched by fabric or ornament, held no shame, no defense. It was not exposed. It was simply present, like the bark of a tree, like the stone of the spring, like the water that did not ask to be seen, but simply was. She stepped into the center of the clearing, her feet leaving faint impressions in the moss that rose slowly after she passed, erasing her presence like soft memory. She looked up. The sky was visible through the layered canopy, only in fragments, like glimpses of distant thought, but even those small windows held brilliance not of noon or firelight, but of morning, of first light, of the kind of golden hue that arrives only once each day and never quite the same way twice. In that moment, as she turned her face toward those golden fragments, something shifted. From between the trees, from the spaces where trunks stood widest and shadows were deepest, came movement. Not fast, not sudden. A figure approached, not in the shape of a man or a god, not in the form of beast or bird, but a presence, tall and broad, made not of flesh, but of living wood, a dryad, or perhaps something older. It had bark for skin, dark and knotted like the trunks it had come from, and leaves in place of hair, long trailing vines that rustled faintly with every step. Its eyes were not eyes at all, but hollow spaces glowing faintly with green light, not fierce, but slow, like fireflies in fog. It moved with no fear, no hesitation, but with the deliberate motion of one who has seen countless seasons and answers only to time itself. It stopped several paces from Aphrodite and tilted its head not in greeting but in recognition. She did not step back. She did not speak. Instead, she lowered her head gently, not in submission but in balance, as if acknowledging a truth already known. The creature extended one long limb, its fingers more like roots, curling inward and outward as it reached down to the base of a nearby tree and touched the earth. Where it touched, the soil darkened and moistened. A sprout emerged. It rose quickly, but not unnaturally, as if simply catching up to a moment that had been long delayed. Leaves unfurled, buds formed, and within seconds, a flower opened. White, with petals as soft as mist, broad and delicate, and glowing faintly at the edges, as if remembering the moonlight from which it was born. The creature stepped back. Aphrodite knelt again, reaching toward the flower. She touched it gently, not with possession, but with appreciation. Her fingertips moved across the petals like wind over water, and as she did, the grove deepened in quiet. Even the insects stilled, even the spring slowed. She plucked the flower, not quickly, not sharply, but as one who knows that all things given must be received with care. She rose, holding it in both hands, cupped like a gift, and the creature, the dryad or spirit or guardian, watched her in silence. Then, without words, it turned and stepped backward into the grove. And as it moved, the trees closed behind it, folding their limbs inward until the space where it had stood became dense once more, indistinguishable from any other thicket in the forest. Aphrodite stood alone again, holding the first offering made by the land, the first bloom not shaped by season but by recognition. She brought the flower to her lips, and inhaled. The scent was warm, deep, unlike any rose or herb, but containing something of both a perfume that seemed to carry meaning, not just fragrance. She tucked it behind her ear, and for the first time, the grove smiled, not with mouths or laughter, but with light, with wind, with a subtle warming that could only be felt in the bones. The air within the grove had grown softer, not just in temperature, but in tone, as though the very molecules around Aphrodite had taken on the cadence of breath, long and slow and unbroken, like the sea at twilight, or the hush that settles over land just after snowfall. She stood beneath the twisted boughs with the white flower tucked gently behind her ear, its pale petals glowing faintly against the curve of her temple, held not by pin or braid, but by stillness and intention. Her feet were rooted to the moss like a sapling, but her eyes followed the slow stirrings of the upper branches, the movement of leaves that turned one by one, touched not by weather but by recognition. Each leaf offering its face to her like a page turned in a book not yet written. There was no urgency, only the steady acceptance that something had changed, not dramatically but permanently, in the rhythm of the island, in the breath of the trees, in the memory of stone and root and cloud. The grove itself was no longer simply a place of arrival. It had become a vessel of witnessing. Everything within it, the spring, the moss, the insects humming in loops that mimicked music only they could understand, had begun to reorient, to subtly reshape their being around her presence, as if nature itself were shifting in response to her, rather than expecting her to conform to it. Even the light, that eternal wanderer, lingered longer on her skin than it did on bark or leaf, casting slow, warm shadows that extended outward like pathways to somewhere unseen. This was not the light of performance or spectacle. It was the light of welcome, of homecoming. She stepped forward, and the earth made room. Her foot pressed into the moss with a firmness that left no indentation, no damage, only a momentary deepening of color that faded as she passed. The air changed, too, not in temperature, but in shape, in how it moved around her, swirling low and close, like animals at her heels. The breeze carried scent now, the green of bruised leaves, the honeyed sweetness of early fig, the resinous spice of pine bark exposed to heat. These were not random. These were offerings, ephemeral and weightless, carried to her nostrils not for utility, but for greeting. In later ages, when temples would rise in her name, priests would burn oils of cinnamon and cedar, would scatter rose petals in the corners of courtyards, would steep herbs in silver bowls to let the steam curl upward as breath to the gods. But none of it would ever match the purity of that first moment when the world itself scented the air just for her. Beyond the grove, the landscape changed again. The trees gave way to a wide glade with grass that grew longer here, feathered at the tips and colored in streaks of olive, gold, and gray, like a woven cloak laid flat to dry. Here and there, small stones rose like sleeping animals, smoothed by wind, half covered in moss or lichen, pale beneath the sun but warm to the touch. No path marked this field. No fence or break defined it. But it did not feel wild. It felt kept, as though tended by invisible hands who knew not to prune or shape, but simply to notice. Aphrodite stepped into the field, and the tall grass leaned away from her without bowing, not in submission, but in ceremony, creating a slow ripple around her that echoed outward in ever-widening circles. She reached out her hand, fingers slightly spread, palm downward, and as she moved forward, the tips of the grasses brushed against her skin like whispers of forgotten names. It was not pain or even tickle, it was contact without intrusion, a touch that asked nothing and gave everything. She closed her eyes, and in that stillness, she heard something new. It was not sound, not exactly, not voice, not exactly, but a tone, a thread, a note that hovered just beneath the range of conscious hearing. It vibrated through the ground, not through her feet, but up her spine, not a shiver, but an invitation, a hum, and she followed it, not with direction, but with intuition, with the kind of inner pull that birds feel when they turn toward distant shores they have never seen, or the kind of certainty that flowers carry when they bend toward the sun even before it rises. She followed without needing to know. The hum led her to a rise, barely a hill, marked by a single olive tree, gnarled and small, but wide in the roots, its trunk hollowed by time and its branches reaching in a shape not unlike open arms. Beneath it, a circle of stone, low, flat, edged with grass and lined with pieces of shell pressed into the dirt like forgotten jewelry. There was no seat, no altar, just stone and tree and silence. Aphrodite knelt in the center, not because she was told to, but because it felt familiar, as if she had sat there once before, perhaps in a dream or in a memory carried not in mind, but in flesh. Above her, the wind changed, not in speed, not in strength, but in meaning. It circled once, then dipped low, brushing against her face, lifting her hair, curling around her limbs like silk pulled through water. She did not resist it. She did not react. She allowed it to know her, and as it moved, it gathered pieces of her, the scent of her skin, the salt that still lingered, the heat of her breath, the shine of her shoulder, the curve of her voice, though she had not yet spoken. The wind took it all, not greedily, but carefully, and rose. It climbed the hill. It moved across the grove. It passed over trees and stones and the pool she had washed in. It rose higher, through the columns of light, through the canopy, into the sky, carrying what it had learned. It did not speak, for wind has no mouth, but it carried a name. Not a sound, but a shape. Not a label, but a presence. It carried that knowing across the island, over the sea, into the mountains where gods slumbered, into the caves where nymphs danced, into the clouds where titans whispered of old things. And the world felt it, not the sound, the shift, the existence. She had arrived. The island sighed, and for the first time, the name Aphrodite moved through the world not as a word, but as a sensation, warm, slow, glowing, like the curve of light across a still body, like the scent of citrus before it's cut, like the moment a hand hovers over skin just before it touches. No one heard it, but everyone knew it. And beneath the olive tree, the flower behind her ear shone brighter for a moment and then returned to stillness. The sun had climbed higher by now, though time still moved in long, honey-thick stretches, indifferent to clocks or shadows or the urgency of man. It lingered in the sky as if it too had found something worth watching, its light warmer but no more harsh, filtered through a layer of sea-born haze that turned the air the color of pearls soaked in milk. The island had not changed much in form, but everything had deepened. The shadows were longer, the leaves more vibrant, the silence more textured. It was no longer a place awaiting arrival. It had become a vessel for presence. And Aphrodite, now resting in the hollow beneath the olive tree, breathed as though her lungs were tuned to the very rhythm of the world. She was not asleep, not quite, But her body had become still in that way a flame stills when protected from all wind, alive, aware, but untouched by motion. Her hands rested lightly on her thighs, her fingers curled inward like petals after bloom. The white flower behind her ear remained in place, though its edges had begun to turn translucent, the way blossoms do when they have given their full scent to the day. Her eyes were half closed, not in weariness, but in calm, not dimmed by fatigue, but focused inward, as though seeing something not in front of her but within her, something older than the sky above and softer than the grass beneath. Her breath moved slowly in and out, just enough to shift the air around her, just enough to keep the island listening. And somewhere nearby, beneath a rise in the land where the grass grew thicker and the stones were shaped by centuries of wind and salt, there lay a pool, not the spring where she had bathed, but a different one, hidden, still, wide as a room, ringed with white stone and shaded by tall ferns whose fronds arched overhead like the ribs of a cathedral. The water there was unmoving, as if it had not been disturbed since the world was new. It did not ripple. It did not overflow. It only reflected, and in that still mirror, there lived no fish, no insects, no plants, only the sky and the shapes it chose to hold. The wind, which had once learned her name and carried it away like a secret wrapped in silk, returned now in a softer form, not as messenger, but as companion. It passed over the pool in a slow exhale, not enough to disturb the surface, but enough to invite. And Aphrodite, without instruction, without question, rose and turned toward it. Her feet moved over the land like water itself, smooth, responsive, without imprint. She did not glance behind her, for there was nothing to leave behind. Everything followed. Light followed. Silence followed. Even the shadow of the olive tree reached in her direction as she walked. She descended through the grass, brushing her fingertips gently along its tops, and the path beneath her seemed to form itself as she moved, parting just enough for her stride, never breaking, never resisting. The air cooled slightly, the closer she came to the pool, not from absence of sun, but from presence of water. Water so still, it made the very idea of sound feel impolite. And when she stepped into the clearing and saw the surface, her breath caught, not sharply, not with surprise, but with reverence. She moved toward it, and the water responded not with waves or motion, but with clarity. It seemed to shine inward rather than outward, to glow not from reflection, but from memory. As she knelt beside it, the ferns around her shifted upward, their leaves arching to provide shade without darkness, their stems creaking softly like aged wood adjusting to weather. She leaned forward and for the first time saw herself. Her reflection did not blink. It did not shimmer. It did not distort with the wind. It held her gaze with stillness so profound it seemed less like a mirror and more like a twin one, who had waited for her through lifetimes, through seas, through stars, and now finally met her eyes. The woman in the water had hair like morning, eyes like storms that chose to sleep, lips that had not yet spoken but carried the weight of meaning in their curve. Her shoulders were rounded, not in weakness, but in softness. Her hands rested gently at her sides, open, not clenched, and her skin, bathed in light and shade, was not pale or dark, but luminous, the color of being seen. She reached toward the image, slowly, gently, her fingertips hovering just above the surface. The moment before she touched it, a breeze moved behind her, lifting a single curl of hair from her neck. She paused, and in that breath of pause, she smiled not broadly, not with joy, but with awareness. It was the smile of someone who had found no surprise in what she saw, only truth. Then she touched the water. It rippled once, not in panic, but in acceptance, and the reflection blurred into silver rings that spread outward in perfect circles until they met the edge of the stone and dissolved. The sound it made was barely audible, a tone more than a noise, like the hum of air in a temple, like the note left ringing after a gong is touched and the hand retreats. She withdrew her hand and let the droplets fall from her fingers back into the pool, each one returning home without resistance. Beside her, the ferns began to sway, not in wind, but in rhythm, like dancers warming up before music. The moss near the stones pulsed slightly, as if breathing. The stones themselves warmed, glowing faintly beneath the lichen that covered them. Everything, it seemed, was responding not to what she did, but to what she was not, to her actions, but to her presence. And in that stillness, the world began to shift again. Far above, high on the crags of the island, where trees thinned and the sky opened wide, the first gull turned its head. It did not cry out, it simply watched. Its feathers ruffled slightly in the wind that carried her name. And below, in the roots of the island, in the hollows where the deepest waters pooled, unseen by light or air, ancient currents changed course, not sharply but gently, bending around new gravity, new meaning. Aphrodite stood. She did not wipe the water from her hand. She let it dry in the sun, let the warmth of the moment seal it into memory. She turned from the pool, not as one who departs, but as one who finishes a chapter. The ferns bowed behind her, the stones cooled, the reflection remained for a while, even after she walked away, and the pool held her image a little longer, like the island itself was not ready to forget her shape. The path she followed now was no longer moss or marble or even bare earth, but something in between, a narrow stretch of land where roots wove beneath the soil like threads in an unseen tapestry, and the surface was softened by generations of fallen leaves that had crumbled over centuries into a fragrant loam, warm and deep and dark, with memory. Her feet pressed lightly into it, not disturbing, but communing. Each step a kind of conversation between skin and soil, breath and stone. She did not look down as she walked, and she did not need to. The land carried her, not physically, but willingly, like a river shaping itself to the form of whatever floats upon it. The air had changed again, carrying more weight now, not in heaviness, but in fullness, as though it held the beginning of a song not yet sung, but already known. Around her, the island had entered a state of blooming, not all at once, and not in excess but in waves, slow and patient, as if the very idea of beauty were taking form in the world for the first time, learning to express itself through color and fragrance and texture. Trees that had remained plain for centuries now began to twist their bark into patterns that mimicked the flow of water and wind. Flowers that had never bloomed before now stretched their petals toward the sky, opening not in hunger but in greeting. Even the rocks changed, shedding their dusty grays and revealing veins of ochre, of soft pinks and warm browns that glinted in the sunlight like newly washed skin. The world was not changing because it had to. It was changing because it wanted to. Aphrodite paused at the edge of a meadow where the trees parted in a soft, irregular ring, and the grasses grew not in wild tangles, but in soft spirals, low to the ground and silver-edged, as if brushed with moonlight even at midday. In the center of the field stood a single fig tree, not tall, not proud, but round and full, its branches bowed under the weight of ripening fruit. The figs were pale gold, dusted with the faintest down, and their scent was thick in the air, rich and resinous, not cloying but deeply earthy, like the warmth of a home that has never known winter. Bees circled lazily among the branches, not in frenzy, but in rhythm, their wings catching the light in tiny bursts of iridescence that flickered like signals between dimensions. The grass beneath the tree was flattened in a perfect circle, not by foot or hoof, but by time and expectation, a space prepared, not designed. She entered the circle and sat beneath the fig tree, her back resting against the trunk, her legs drawn slightly to one side in the shape of a spiral mirrored by the land. The bark behind her was warm, textured, deeply grooved, and it pressed into her back like a slow embrace, steady and unchanging. She reached up and plucked a single fig, turning it in her fingers before breaking it open with a movement so gentle it resembled breath. The fruit opened along its seam, revealing an interior of deep crimson, soft and glistening, its seeds like tiny garnets suspended in honey. She lifted one half to her lips and tasted not out of hunger, but out of connection. The fig was sweet. Not the sweetness of sugar or honey, but of time, the flavor of sun caught in fruit, the quiet work of roots and light and patience condensed into something that could be held in the hand and known. She chewed slowly, swallowed, let the flavor settle behind her teeth, and then she ate the second half. And when she was done, she placed the stem back into the earth beside her, pressing it in with one finger, not as an act of planting, but of return. She remained there for a long while, minutes, hours, perhaps more, with her eyes half closed and her hands resting on the earth, her breath moving in the same rhythm as the branches above her. And in that stillness, the island began to hum. It was not sound, and it was not silence. It was something between a vibration in the roots, a pulse in the soil, a whisper in the wind, and the world listened. The birds did not sing, but they moved in patterns that mimicked the curves of her limbs. The insects circled in spirals that mirrored the part in her hair, the tilt of her shoulders, the lines of her collarbone. Even the clouds above formed rings, barely visible, like the trace of a god's finger across the sky. The world was no longer reacting to her. It was becoming her. In time, she stood again, slowly, like a tide lifting a boat from sleep. Her skin now carried the scent of the fig, of bark and sun and sweetness. Her hands were stained faintly pink from its juice, and she did not wipe them clean. She stepped out of the circle, and as she did, the grass she had rested upon sprang back upward, not erasing her presence, but accepting it. The bees followed her briefly, then returned to the tree. The wind moved with her, but quieter now, like a child walking behind a parent, content to observe. And as she passed once more through the trees, the island itself seemed to draw in a breath deep and long and full, and with that breath, it exhaled something into the wider world. Not a message, not a prophecy, but an awareness, a shift, a ripple that would pass over lands and waters, through temples and dreams and the hearts of all who lived thereafter. A ripple that whispered, "Beauty has arrived," and it does not shout. It simply exists. She returned to the shoreline, not because she had forgotten it, not because something called her back, but because the rhythm of the island moved in circles, not lines, and in circles there is no end, only return. The trees thinned gently, the light opened wider, and the sounds of the sea, once distant and folded behind birdsong and breeze, began to grow nearer, more textured. More layered the slow break of waves against flat rock, the fizz of foam dissolving in sand, the distant pull of water retreating over pebbles and shells. It was not loud. It was not sudden. It was steady, like a memory surfacing from sleep. Aphrodite moved toward it through a narrow channel between dunes, where low bushes brushed her legs with silver leaves, and the scent of salt thickened in the air like a story about to be told. The sky had shifted once again. The sun now hung lower, not dimmed but golden and heavy, and the air had taken on the warmth of late afternoon when everything slows, when shadows stretch across the earth, not as warnings, but as gentle reminders that light too must rest. She stepped into it without pause, letting her eyes adjust to the brightness that bounced off the water in long ribbons, letting her feet sink slightly into the cooler sand, its surface still warm, but its underlayers cool and damp with the sea's breath. The beach she had first arrived upon was no longer untouched. Her earlier footprints were gone, erased by the tide, but the place itself held memory in shape and feeling. The sand remembered the curve of her weight. The air remembered the temperature of her skin. The sea, which had carried her here in silence, now seemed to lift itself slightly, as if to meet her gaze. She moved toward it with the same pace she had always kept, neither slow nor quick, but measured, deliberate, a pace of presence rather than intention. And when she reached the place where the sea met land, that trembling line of foam and sand and time, she did not hesitate. She walked forward. The water kissed her feet, wrapped around her ankles, pulled gently at her calves. It was cool, but not cold, refreshing in the way of clear thoughts, of early morning, of clean linen in breeze. She moved deeper, until it touched her knees, then her hips. The fabricless folds of light shimmered on her skin like molten pearls. The waves did not crash. They swelled. They circled. They embraced. She turned slowly in place, letting the water hold her, letting her body sway with its rhythm. Her hair floated behind her like strands of seaweed, catching the light in bronze and gold and shadow. The flower from the fig tree had remained behind, given back to the land, but a new bloom, smaller, paler, with 5 translucent petals, drifted past her on the current and rested against her shoulder. She did not touch it. She let it float there. It stayed. And there, in the water, she raised her hands to the sky, not in prayer, not in plea, but in offering. Her fingers stretched open like petals, her palms turned upward as if to say, I am here. And above her, the light shifted. Clouds parted slightly. A breeze moved inland from the open sea, carrying with it salt and distance and the strange, clean scent of open water. It lifted her hair. It cooled her skin, and it carried her presence outward, far beyond the shore, where no boat had yet sailed, where the horizon trembled with heat and light. The sea shimmered not with storm, not with wave, but with memory. Dolphins turned mid-leap and paused in their arc. Seabirds flew lower, wings tipped toward the source of change. In the deeps, where light had never touched, something stirred. Coral shifted color. Whales turned in wide circles. Even the seafloor, still and sleeping for centuries, seemed to sigh beneath the pressure of her being. And Aphrodite stood still, arms open, eyes closed, her breath matched to the tide, her body swaying in time with the slow pulse of the ocean. Not commanding, not demanding, simply existing, fully, softly, unshaken. When she opened her eyes again, the sun had dropped lower. its reflection laying a long, golden path across the water straight toward her. It looked like something she could walk across, not to leave, not to escape, but to explore. And for a moment, she stepped forward, as if testing whether that golden bridge could hold her weight. The water rose to meet her, but the light remained, stretching ahead in quiet invitation. But she stopped, not because of doubt, because the island still needed her. She turned and walked back to shore, water cascading off her limbs in sheets, not rushing, but flowing, like memory leaving the body. She stepped onto the sand, which now felt cooler underfoot, and paused to watch the retreating tide. The waves pulled back, leaving behind shells smooth and broken, pale and iridescent, some spiral, some flat. She bent and picked one up, a narrow, curved fragment, no longer than a fingertip, but catching the light in soft mother of pearl. She held it in her palm and studied it, not because it was beautiful, but because it had been part of something whole, and still was. She walked up the beach with it, carrying it lightly between her fingers, and when she reached the place where sea met grass, she knelt and pressed the shell into the sand. It sank slightly, held by moisture, and caught the sun one final time before the shadows reached it. She touched it once, briefly, then rose. Behind her, the sea did not crash. It bowed, and the wind now still, and Golden whispered her name again. Not loudly, not as a word, but as a presence, and the island, once again, breathed in. Evening came not with sharpness or haste, but as a gentle fading, a softening of edges, a cooling of stone, a deepening of shadow that folded itself slowly across the landscape, like a blanket laid over the shoulders of someone already half asleep. The sun dipped lower, not falling but reclining, letting its final light stretch across the sky in streaks of amber and lilac, brushing the tops of trees with flame that did not burn, and glazing the surface of the sea with a shimmer like melted brass. The air changed too, not in temperature alone, but in density, in weight, in the way it wrapped itself around the body, more intimate now, more familiar, like the warmth of another's breath felt through shared silence. Aphrodite stood at the edge of the grove once again, her body golden in the fading light, her skin brushed with the last warmth of day, and though nothing in her expression changed, something in the earth beneath her feet began to tremble, not with fear, but with expectation. Far above, past the sky and its drifting veils of cloud, past the arc of stars that had not yet appeared, past the air where birds still drifted in widening spirals, something watched, something listened. The gods, who had remained still in their palaces and clouds, in their thrones of marble and wind, began now to stir not with alarm, but with the slow, deliberate awareness of those who sensed the shifting of fate beneath their fingertips. They did not speak yet, they did not move, but their attention turned. On Olympus, where the air is thin and sharp and sweet, where marble stays warm through snow by divine will alone, Hera turned her gaze toward the horizon and narrowed her eyes. In her hand, a spindle of gold ceased its spinning. In her chest, the tight weight of unspoken memory began to shift. She felt no threat, and yet she sat straighter. Her crown glinted. Far below in the sea, where temples of coral stretch taller than cities, where currents move like secrets and leviathans sleep in silence older than time, Poseidon felt a ripple through his kingdom. The water around him grew warmer for a moment, not from fire, but from presence. He closed his eyes. He saw not her, but her shape, a curve in the tide, a shift in rhythm, a new gravitational pull that was not moon or sun. His trident dipped slightly. He smiled. Even in the halls of shadow, where Hades walks among the roots of all things, and the walls are carved from bones and obsidian, a faint breeze passed a breeze where no wind should go. He paused mid-step, looked upward, not in concern, but in wonder. The dead remained still, but something ancient in their dust reached gently toward the surface. On the island, Aphrodite sat again beside the pool she had visited before, the mirror pool that never rippled unless touched, that held reflections longer than memory. She did not peer into it this time. She only listened. The frogs had begun to call, low and slow, their voices soft drums in the rising hush of evening. The insects tuned their wings in harmony. Somewhere above, an owl opened its eyes for the first time that day, blinked and stretched its neck silently. And within all of this, the gods watching from afar, the animals shifting with the light, the wind still carrying salt and sweetness, Aphrodite remained still, her breath slow, her eyes open but soft. She placed one hand on the earth and the other over her chest, feeling the rhythm of her own pulse beneath the skin. It was not loud, not rapid, but full of time, full of warmth, full of the space that others would one day call love, but that she simply felt as being. The world around her began to mirror her state. The light grew lower, thicker, golden at first and then bronze, and then, as if sighing, it dimmed into blue, not cold, but soft, not empty, but wide. And in that blue light, the first stars appeared not all at once, not in brilliance, but one by one, like eyes blinking open after centuries of sleep. They shimmered, faint and slow, caught in the canopy between tree limbs and reflected on the surface of the still pool. The night had begun. Far across the world, temples would soon be built to her name. Not yet, but soon. Sculptors would try to catch the curve of her lips in marble. Priests would light oil lamps in her honor. Children would be named after her grace, and sailors would whisper her name into the wind when the water turned calm. But for now, there was only the island, only the pool, only the quiet. And Aphrodite sat within it, as the gods turned toward her, as the stars arranged themselves. As the sea settled once again, darkness did not fall. It gathered, like folds of velvet pulled gently over the eyes of the earth. It came with softness, with patience, with the grace of something that did not need to be announced to be known. The stars thickened above, no longer lonely specks, but a great canopy woven with silver and blue, pinpricks in the skin of the sky through which something older breathed quietly. The moon had not yet risen, and so the world remained wrapped in a deeper kind of night, a night not for fear or secrets, but for stillness, for the unfolding of things that cannot bloom beneath the gaze of day. Aphrodite walked through the night barefoot, her steps slow and deliberate, each movement connected to the last by the unbroken ribbon of her awareness. The island had cooled beneath her feet, the warmth of the sun retreating into stones and bark, leaving behind a gentle chill that did not bite but caressed, reminding the skin that it was alive. The grasses swayed in silence now, no longer rustled by day winds, but by something subtler, the movement of breath, the turning of leaves in their sleep, the slow rotation of stars above. Her hair drifted behind her like a cloud unanchored, and the scent of fig and salt lingered still on her skin, softened now, matured by dusk, becoming not a fragrance, but a presence. She approached a hollow not deep, not hidden, just low ground where the land had sunk in on itself long ago, forming a bowl lined with moss and scattered stones. Above it, the sky opened wide. No trees reached in, no canopy interrupted. Just sky, just stars, just the quiet sound of one's own heartbeat laid bare against the night. She stepped into the hollow, the earth giving gently under her weight, and sat in the very center. Her knees bent slightly, her hands rested in her lap, her gaze tilted upward, not seeking, just meeting. And in that moment, everything paused. The wind paused. The water, far off in the distance, seemed to hush. The leaves on distant branches froze mid-movement. The stars shimmered but did not blink. It was not a silence of fear. It was not the silence before a storm. It was the silence of reverence, the silence of witness, as if the very fabric of the world had recognized something it did not yet have words for, and so it simply waited, holding its breath. Above, in the heavens where time moves differently and thought becomes shape, the gods no longer looked away. Their attention had become stillness, their presence pressure, like the weight of air before rain, but lighter, like gravity, with no source. They did not speak, not yet, but they were listening, and Aphrodite, not yet called, not yet named aloud, sat within that silence with peace. She did not tense, she did not question, she simply was, fully, quietly, like the curve of a shell formed over centuries, like light reflected in still water, like the moment just before a name is spoken. She breathed in. The stars did not move, but they brightened not with light, but with depth, as if drawing closer without changing place. They pulsed slowly, faintly, like distant hearts echoing the rhythm of hers. Her breath moved through her in long waves. Her chest rose and fell with no urgency. Her spine straight, her shoulders dropped, and in that posture, in that shape, the very idea of grace took form. Somewhere, very far away, a child looked up at the sky and felt a strange warmth. Somewhere, in a temple not yet built, the first stone cracked along a fault line no hand had touched. Somewhere, on the edge of a dream, an old woman forgot her sorrow for one moment and smiled without knowing why. The ripple had begun. She remained in the hollow as the night deepened. The sky shifted overhead, turning darker still, and then at last the moon appeared. It rose not from behind clouds or hills, but from the sea itself, a perfect disk of pale silver lifting slowly over the horizon. It cast a long line of light across the water, a path not of travel but of presence, and as it climbed, it bathed the land in its gentle cold. The grove shimmered under its glow. The stones shone with dew, and Aphrodite's skin, already golden with the memory of day, now took on the quiet sheen of moonlight, as though carved from pearl, as though sculpted from sleep. The gods watched, and the world waited, not for something to begin, but for something to be acknowledged. And she, in her silence, waited too, not for them to speak, but for them to remember. The moment did not begin with sound, it began with weight. A subtle shift in the stillness, a hush deepening so gradually that even the breeze seemed unaware it had stopped moving, as though the air itself had drawn inward and was holding its breath. The moon now hung directly above her, full and luminous, its light pooling softly in the hollow where Aphrodite sat. It coated the ground in silver and pearl, touched the folds of her skin, glinted in her eyes, and turned the very shape of her into something more than human, more than divine, something eternal, something that had always existed, only now remembered. She did not move. Her legs remained folded beneath her. Her hands still rested in her lap. Her spine was straight and her gaze steady. Her breath was the only motion in the world. And around her, the world listened. From high above, even the stars, above the vaulted halls of Olympus, where columns rise into mist and thrones sit in endless council, a voice spoke. It was not a sound that pierced the night. It was not thunder, nor echo, nor whisper. It was presence shaped into word. It came not through the ears, but through the chest, through the spine, through the very soil beneath her. It was the kind of voice that could turn light into structure, breath into form, silence into meaning. And it said, Aphrodite. That was all. No title, no trumpet, no origin, just the name, and in that name everything gathered. Foam and wave, birth and drift, sand and fig, silence and curve. 1,000 tiny moments, scattered like beads across the day, now drawn together on a single thread. The name held all of it. The softness, the slowness, the shine, the ache. It was not a name given. It was a name revealed. The world had not decided what to call her. It had remembered what she had always been. She closed her eyes, not in awe, not in surprise, but in peace. Her breath moved deeper now, slower, as if the air itself were thicker with meaning. The name settled over her shoulders like a shawl, warm and invisible, and beneath her skin her blood responded. Her pulse steadied, her muscles softened, her bones accepted it. She did not need to speak it aloud. She had never needed to. From the mountain peaks where Hermes listened with tilted head, to the stone depths where Hestia knelt beside flame, to the wet caves of naiads and the wind-carved cliffs of dryads and unseen nymphs of air and root, the name passed like a ripple, soft but unignorable. The gods did not speak, not yet, but they listened more closely now, their ears tuned to silence, their fingers paused mid-gesture, their thoughts stilled just enough to let the weight of the world shift around this one point. Aphrodite. The name echoed through no canyon, yet it lingered, folding into the grain of wood, the veins of marble, the cracks of olive stones, and the curl of grape leaves. Even in places she had never touched, far islands, future cities, mountain valleys, still asleep beneath winter snow, something in the name began to bloom. It was not recognition. It was resonance. She remained seated, as the light of the moon spilled across her like a tide that never receded. Her skin absorbed it. Her hair glowed in it. Her silence continued to deepen, not in absence, but in fullness. The island beneath her began to hum again, gently, faintly, a song without melody that passed through roots and water and rock. Above her, the stars adjusted their positions minutely, like pieces on a board just before the first move. The flowers she had once placed behind her ear had long since returned to soil, but new blooms now opened in the grasses around her. Small ones, white and gold, with petals so fine they curled inward at the edges as if holding warmth. They opened slowly, facing her not as worship, but as harmony. Crickets began to sing in a steady, low rhythm. The sea far below shifted gently, a longer wave cresting on the sand, a longer pause before it withdrew again. In the sky, A single star flared, not violently, just once, as if blinking, as if approving. And in the hollow, Aphrodite opened her eyes again. She did not smile. She did not cry. She simply breathed. And with each breath, her name spread further, into stone, into memory, into the bones of the world. The night had deepened into something beyond time, not darker, not quieter, but wider. As if the world, having named her, had exhaled and now rested in that breath. The moon hung lower now, drifting westward with the weightless grace of a memory dissolving into dawn. Its light softened, not fading, but folding inward, its beams turning cooler, paler, pulling long shadows across the earth like ribbons being drawn gently from water. The stars overhead held steady, unmoving, as if watching her breathe, unwilling to close their eyes first. Aphrodite rose from the hollow, her body slow and deliberate in movement, as though she herself had become part of the island's breath. She stood without urgency, her feet pressing softly into the moss-covered earth that now bore flowers in her wake, faint, white, barely visible except under moonlight, petals no larger than the nail of a thumb, but perfect in their shape. Her hands hung loosely by her sides, fingers slightly curled as if still cradling silence. Her hair flowed behind her in long dark waves, brushed by the cool breeze that stirred once more after a long pause, as though even the air was now content to move again, only because she had moved. She stepped out of the hollow and followed a path that had not existed before, but had always been waiting, a narrow trail between sleeping bushes and stones glazed with dew, illuminated not by torch or fire, but by the faint blue shimmer that clings to things touched by moonlight and mystery. The island had reshaped itself around her presence without need for thunder or spectacle. Nothing cracked, nothing split, and yet everything knew she had passed. Down the slope she walked, her bare feet barely whispering across the grass, toward the shore once more. The sea, which had quieted into the long rhythm of midnight tides, welcomed her with a sound older than speech, the slow inhale of wave over sand, the distant sigh of foam curling and vanishing into salt. The water was darker now, reflecting fewer stars, absorbing more silence, but it was not asleep. It was listening. She stepped onto the beach, and the sand, cool and damp beneath her soles, gave just slightly. Here, again, the marks of her feet were not imprints of ownership, but of presence. Temporary, soft, complete. She walked to the edge of the water, the tide stretching toward her in a long, slow ribbon. It reached her toes, paused, and withdrew, then came again. Gentle, regular, familiar. She remained still at the line of sea and land. Behind her, the island shimmered in the moonlight like a thought too beautiful to speak aloud. Before her, the sea stretched wide, black and blue and silver, its surface quiet but full of endless direction. She knew she would not stay here forever. The world beyond waited, not with urgency, but with longing. The gods had named her, and in doing so, they had opened the world to her. Temples would rise, prayers would be spoken, lovers would light candles in her honor, and sailors would whisper her name before the tide. Artists would sculpt her with hands trembling from awe and desire. Songs would carry her shape across generations. But none of that had touched her yet. None of it lived in her now. Now, there was only the sea, and her breath, and the faint warmth of her name still circling the roots of her body like gold spun through veins. She took one final step forward, letting the water wash over her ankles, then her calves. She did not wade deeper. She did not leave. She stood, allowing herself to become part of both worlds, the world of land and the world of tide, of birth and of journey, of memory and of presence. Far behind her, on the highest hill of the island, a fig tree stirred. Its branches shifted slightly in the wind. One final fruit dropped to the ground without sound. And from that moment on, the world was no longer as it had been, because she had been born, and the silence would never again be the same.